I thought my husband was cheating. I followed him on his work trip, and he was not. Now what? Hey, everyone. I'm Lily, a 26-year-old gal, and I've been married to my wonderful husband, Mark, who's 27, for a bit over 3 years now. But our love story didn't start just 3 years ago. It all began 5 years back when we quite literally bumped into each other at that cozy little coffee shop on the corner of Elm Street. I was in a rush, trying to get my caffeine fix before a super important meeting, and Mark, well, he was just standing there, looking all dazed and handsome. Our eyes met, and it was like something out of a cheesy romantic movie, love at first sight. Since that fateful day, we've weathered so many storms together. We got the most precious little boy, Tommy, who's nearly 2 and is truly the apple of our eye. Every morning, he wakes up with this infectious energy, his chubby little legs running around the house as he babbles away in his own baby language, filling our days with laughter and a bit of that adorable chaos only toddlers can create. Lately, Mark and I have been having these sweet, late-night chats while lying in bed. We talk about how nice it would be to expand our family, imagining Tommy having a little sibling to play with, to share secrets and toys, and grow up side by side. Our marriage has been nothing short of a dream come true. Emotionally, we've been each other's unwavering rock. There have been countless days when work has been an absolute nightmare. I remember one particularly dreadful week in my job. I had this project that seemed doomed from the start, with tight deadlines and impossible demands. By the time I dragged myself home each evening, I was feeling so drained and defeated, like I had nothing left to give. But Mark, he was always there, like a warm and comforting beacon. The moment I walked through the door, he'd pull me into his strong arms, let me vent all my frustrations, and gently wipe away my tears with his thumb. And I've done the exact same for him. There was this one time he had a major project that was stressing him out to no end. I could see the worry lines etched on his forehead as he came home night after night, exhausted. So, I decided to do something special. I cooked up his all-time favorite meal, that mouth-watering lasagna he can never resist, lit some scented candles to create a soothing ambience, and just sat there, listening intently as he talked through his every worry, offering a word of comfort or a bit of advice when needed. Physically, we've always been affectionate. Little touches throughout the day have become an essential part of our routine. Like when we'd take Tommy for a stroll in the park on a sunny afternoon, Mark would casually reach over and hold my hand, his fingers interlacing with mine, and it just felt so right. Or in the mornings, as we're getting ready for the day, he'd plant a soft, lingering kiss on my forehead, a simple gesture that always managed to make my heart flutter. And, well, our private moments have been filled with that special kind of passion and intimacy that keeps the spark between us burning bright, a flame that has never once flickered despite the years and the challenges. On top of all that, Mark is an amazing father. After a long day at the office, he doesn't even take a moment to catch his breath. He'll walk through the door, drop his briefcase, and immediately get down on the floor, right there with Tommy. They'll start building these elaborate block towers, with Tommy giggling and handing over blocks as Mark constructs a miniature city. Or they'll engage in a wild chase around the living room, with Tommy shrieking in delight and Mark pretending to be a big, goofy monster. Watching them together always fills my heart with a warmth and contentment that I truly can't even put into words. It's like seeing the purest form of love and connection, and it makes me fall in love with Mark all over again. But then, it was like a dark cloud started to roll in out of nowhere. I've got this friend, let's call her Ashley. She works in the same department as Mark at his company. They don't usually team up for projects, but they do cross paths every now and then. 3 weeks ago, my phone rang, and it was Ashley. Her voice was low and serious, and she said, "Lily, I think you need to keep an eye on Mark. There's this new girl at work, around our age, who joined his team 3 months ago. People are already whispering that she's his work wife." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. What on earth was a work wife? It was a term I'd heard before, but never thought I'd have to associate with my own marriage. Before I could even process it, she sent me a bunch of pictures and videos. My hands were shaking as I opened them. There they were, Mark and this girl, chatting in the hallway, looking at some documents together. But as I really studied every frame, it honestly just seemed like normal coworker banter. They were smiling, sure, but it was the kind of smile you'd share with anyone you were friendly with at work. It was the kind of interaction that happened a dozen times a day in any office setting. Mark had actually mentioned this girl before. He told me they were collaborating on a couple of important projects, and that he had to help her get up to speed since she was new to the company. That made total sense, right? And we've always had an open device policy. That very evening, with a knot in my stomach, I picked up Mark's phone. I scrolled through text after text, email after email, and all I found were work-related exchanges. There was not a single thing that raised any red flags. Every message was professional, to the point, and focused solely on the tasks at hand. There were no flirty emojis, no secretive language, nothing that would even hint at something improper. I decided to have a chat with Mark. I waited until he was settled on the couch after dinner, when the house was quiet and Tommy was already tucked in bed. I sat down next to him, took a deep breath to steady myself, and said, "Honey," trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. "Ashley called and mentioned that you've been working closely with that new girl on your team. She even called her your work wife." Mark's eyes widened for a second, clearly taken aback by the term, and then he burst out laughing. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me tightly, and said, "Baby, you've got nothing to worry about. It's all just work. She's new, and I'm helping her out. That's it. You and Tommy are my world, and no one could ever change that." His eyes were so sincere, looking deep into mine as he spoke, and in that moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I immediately called Ashley and told her she must have misread the situation, that there was nothing fishy going on. But Ashley was as stubborn as a mule. She insisted that there was at least an emotional affair simmering beneath the surface, and that it could turn physical given the chance. I asked her for some solid proof, but she came up empty-handed. For the next week, she kept texting me, saying she saw them having lunch together, or chatting a bit too cozily in the break room. But every time I pressed her for details or evidence, she had nothing to show for it. I was getting so fed up. I finally texted her back and said, "Either send me real proof or just stop. I can't keep living in this state of uncertainty." I still check Mark's phone and laptop from time to time, but, as always, there was nothing out of the ordinary. I'd scroll through his recent calls, his browser history, and every time, it was all just work-related stuff or the occasional news article he'd been reading. Then, that week, Mark got some incredible news. He was promoted. I was over the moon with excitement. It was a well-deserved recognition of all his hard work and dedication. That night, we popped open a bottle of champagne and celebrated like there was no tomorrow. The fizzy liquid seemed to mirror our bubbly mood as we toasted to his success. I was so happy that I almost forgot all about what Ashley had been saying. But the next day, when Mark came home from work, he was carrying a bottle of red wine. There was a sticky note taped to it that read, "Congratulations, Mark, on your promotion." I froze. All those doubts came crashing back like a tidal wave. I lost my temper and yelled at him, "Are you cheating on me? Who is this girl? You better tell me the truth." Mark was visibly stunned. He tried to explain, his voice shaking a little. "It's just a friendly gesture from a colleague. You know how these things go at work. People give gifts to celebrate big moments." But I wasn't listening. I was so caught up in my own fear and anger that I said some really awful things that I regretted the moment they left my mouth. That night, we slept back to back. I was angry and confused, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. The sheets felt cold and uncomfortable, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's shocked face and heard my own harsh words echoing in my head. The next day, seeing Mark's sad and tired face, I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost took my breath away. I walked up to him, tears streaming down my cheeks, and hugged him tightly. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. Please forgive me," I sobbed. He hugged me back and said he understood, that he knew I was just worried. We made up, but deep down I still had that nagging feeling, that tiny seed of doubt that refused to go away. The next morning, after that awful, sleepless night, the guilt was eating me alive. I woke up before Mark and just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the horrible things I'd said to him. His face when I'd accused him, that look of shock and hurt, it was burned into my mind. I knew I had to make things right, but I also couldn't shake that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. When Mark finally stirred and opened his eyes, he gave me a small, sad smile. I could tell he was still stinging from my outburst. I wanted to say something, to apologize again, but the words got stuck in my throat. We went about our morning routine in an uncomfortable silence. Tommy, bless his little heart, was the only one who seemed oblivious to the tension in the air. He was running around, asking for his favorite cereal, and babbling about the toys he wanted to play with. As the day went on, I tried to push the whole thing to the back of my mind. I focused on taking care of Tommy, playing with him, and cleaning up the house. But every time my phone buzzed, I'd jump, half expecting it to be Ashley with more updates about Mark and that girl. Thankfully, It was mostly just spam messages and the occasional text from my other friends. Then, out of the blue, Mark came home from work and announced that he had to go on a work trip. It was only for 3 days, but it was going to be over the 4th of July weekend. My heart sank. I knew he didn't travel for work often, and the thought of him being away, especially with that girl in the picture, made my anxiety skyrocket. He told me all about the project they were working on and how important this trip was for the team. I nodded numbly, trying to act supportive. But inside, my mind was racing. After he'd finished talking, I excused myself and went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. I didn't want to be that kind of wife, the paranoid, jealous type. But I also couldn't ignore the doubts that were creeping back in. I picked up my phone and called my best friend, Jenna. She's known me since we were kids, and I knew she'd give me the straight truth. When I told her about the trip and my fears, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lily, I know you're worried, but you can't let this consume you. What if Mark is completely innocent? You following him could ruin everything." I knew she was right. I really did. But the thought of sitting at home, wondering what he was doing and who he was with, was too much to bear. "I have to do it, Jenna," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to know for sure. If I don't, I'll go crazy." Jenna sighed. "Okay, if you yourself up, I'll help you. I'll look after Tommy for a few days. But please be careful. And remember, you might not like what you find." I thanked her profusely, tears of gratitude in my eyes. Without her support, I don't think I could have gone through with it. The day Mark was set to leave arrived. I put on a brave face and helped him pack. I made sure to pack his favorite shirt, the one that always made him feel confident, and his comfy travel pillow. As I was folding his clothes, I slipped a little note into his suitcase. It said, "I love you and I'll miss you. Have a safe trip and come back to us soon." I hoped it would remind him of home and how much we needed him. Once he'd left, I wasted no time. I rushed to the car rental place and got myself a nondescript sedan. My hands were sweating as I signed the paperwork, my nerves getting the better of me. Then, I set off on the long drive to the city where Mark was headed. The journey was a blur. I drove on autopilot, my mind consumed with thoughts of what I might find. What if I saw them holding hands? Kissing? The very idea made me feel sick to my stomach. But I pressed on, determined to get to the bottom of this. When I finally arrived at my destination, I found a small motel on the outskirts of the city. It was cheap and a bit rundown, but it was close enough to Mark's hotel that I could keep an eye on him. I checked in, dropped my bags, and immediately got to work. I spent the first day staking out his company. I found a coffee shop across the street with a perfect view of the entrance, and I hunkered down there, my eyes glued to the door. I must have looked like a crazy person, sipping my coffee nervously and jumping at every little sound. But I didn't care. I was on a mission. Around noon, I saw them emerge. Mark and his colleagues, including the girl. They were laughing and chatting, looking for all the world like a group of friends. They walked to a nearby deli and went inside. I waited a few minutes, then followed at a discreet distance. Peeking through the window, I saw them sitting at a table, eating sandwiches and still talking animatedly. There was nothing overtly suspicious, but my heart was pounding nonetheless. That evening, I watched as Mark and the others went back to their hotel. I waited a while, then drove over and parked a little way down the street. From my vantage point, I could see the hotel lobby. After a bit, Mark came down and joined his colleagues in the hotel bar. They each had a drink, and the atmosphere seemed relaxed. I watched as he laughed and clinked glasses with the others, and for a moment, I wondered if I was being completely ridiculous. But then, the thought of that girl was enough to squash any doubts about my mission. When he finally went up to his room, my phone rang. It was Mark calling to check in. I panicked for a second, then quickly made up an excuse about having a bad connection and not being able to video chat. We talked for a few minutes, him telling me about his day and how the work was going. His voice was warm and familiar, and I felt another stab of guilt. But I pushed it aside and focused on the task at hand. The second day was much the same. I followed Mark from a distance, watching his every move. He went to work, had meetings, and interacted with his colleagues. There was no sign of any inappropriate behavior. By the end of the day, I was starting to feel exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Physically and emotionally. The stress of constantly being on edge was taking its toll. On the third and final day, I woke up early, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. I knew this was it. If I was going to find anything, it would have to be today. I spent the day trailing Mark again, my hope starting to wane. But as the day wore on and nothing happened, I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that Mark seemed innocent, but disappointment that I'd put myself through this whole ordeal for nothing. When he finally left work and started his drive back home, I followed suit. The journey back was long and silent. I had so much to think about. I knew I'd been wrong to doubt Mark, and now I had to face the consequences of my actions. The guilt was overwhelming, and I couldn't wait to get back home and see him, to try and make things right. When I finally pulled into our driveway after that long, guilt-ridden drive back, my hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. I sat in the car for a few minutes, just trying to steady my breathing and gather the courage to go inside. The house looked the same as when I'd left, but everything felt different. I was a different person, a wife who had betrayed her husband's trust, and I didn't know if he'd ever be able to forgive me. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, my legs feeling like jelly. As I walked up to the front door, I could hear Tommy's laughter inside. It was a sound that usually filled me with joy, but now it just made my heart ache more. I opened the door, and Tommy came running towards me, his arms open wide. I picked him up and hugged him tightly, burying my face in his soft hair. Mark came out of the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. When he saw me, he gave me a small smile, but I could see the questions in his eyes. I put Tommy down and walked over to Mark, not knowing what to say. I wanted to throw my arms around him and beg for his forgiveness, but I was too ashamed. Instead, I mumbled something about being tired and needing a shower. Mark nodded, still looking at me a bit curiously, but he didn't press the issue. I rushed upstairs, feeling his gaze on my back the whole way. In the bathroom, I turned on the shower and let the hot water run over me, hoping it would wash away some of my guilt. But it was no byproduct of my actions. But it was no use. As I stood there, I replayed the past few days in my mind, following Mark like a stalker, lying to him on the phone, and all because of my stupid insecurities. I started to cry, the sobs mixing with the sound of the running water. After I composed myself a bit, I got out of the shower and dried off. I put on some fresh clothes and went back downstairs. Mark had made dinner, and the table was set with all of our favorite dishes. It was a sweet gesture, but it only made me feel worse. We sat down to eat, and the conversation was stilted. Tommy babbled on about his day, oblivious to the tension between his parents. Mark and I made small talk, but it was forced. I could barely look him in the eye, and I knew he could sense something was wrong. After dinner, we decided to go to the local park to watch the 4th of July fireworks. It was something we did every year as a family, and I thought maybe it would help break the ice. But as we walked through the park, hand in hand with Tommy between us, I still felt like there was a huge chasm between Mark and me. The fireworks started, and Tommy's eyes lit up with wonder. He clapped and cheered as the sky exploded with colors. Mark put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, but it didn't feel the same. I was so distracted by my guilt that I could barely enjoy the show. When we got home, Tommy went straight to bed, exhausted from the excitement. Mark and I got back to our bedroom and got ready for bed in silence. As we lay there in the dark, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to tell him the truth. I took a deep breath and turned towards him. "Mark," I said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine in the dim light. "What is it, Lily?" I swallowed hard, trying to find the words. "During your trip, I did something really stupid. I got it in my head that something might be going on between you and that girl from work, and I followed you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was complete silence. I could hear Mark's sharp intake of breath, and I knew he was shocked. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You followed me? Why would you do that?" Tears started streaming down my cheeks again. "I don't know. I just let my insecurities get the better of me. I saw that note on the wine bottle, and all of the wine bottle, and all the things Ashley had been saying got to me. I'm so sorry, Mark. I know it was wrong. I just needed to know for sure." He reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You should have talked to me. You know I would have told you the truth. There's nothing going on between me and her. You're the only one I love, Lily. You and Tommy are my whole world." Hearing him say those words made me cry even harder. I knew he was right. I should have trusted him. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed. "Can you ever forgive me?" Mark pulled me into his arms and held me tight. "It's going to take some time, Lily. But I love you, and I want to work through this. We've been through too much together to let this ruin us." I nodded, still crying. I was so grateful for his forgiveness, even if it was going to be a long road to rebuilding the trust one had shattered. Over the next few days, things were still a bit awkward between us, but we were both trying. I made a conscious effort to be more open with Mark, to share my fears and insecurities instead of letting them fester inside me. And Mark was patient with me, giving me the insecurities instead of letting them fester inside me. And Mark was patient with me, giving me the space I needed to come to terms with what I had done. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch after putting Tommy to bed, Mark took my hand and said, "Lily, I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did. We all have our moments of weakness, but from now on, let's promise to always be honest with each other, no matter what." I looked into his eyes and nodded. "I promise, Mark. I'll never do anything like that again." And as we sat there, holding hands, I knew that our marriage was going to be okay. It would take time and effort, but we had the love and commitment to get through this rough patch. We were a family, and we were going to stay that way.